animals have made several appearances
Hi, Amelia.
in the show. Yeah.
How
Hello.
are you today?
Oh, you knew we were talking about
special
you.
friend.
Hi. You want to be in the show too. Well, welcome to this special edition of the Adapt and Thrive conversation series. This episode in particular is going to be geared around political activism with a mindfulness approach. So I have brought the special guest, Heather Hillenbrand, on the series today. She is very active in political work here in Akron, Ohio. And just in these intense, tumultuous political times that we're in, I thought she'd be a great person to talk to about how we can all become a little bit more politically active without it stressing us out, without it taking over our lives, but still taking it seriously and realizing that there's so much that we can take a part in, there's so much that we can do to make a difference. So having said that, thank you for being here, Heather. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, we're post-election. The Trump era is supposedly ending here. And, you know, a lot of people are feeling this sense of relief. But as we just discussed, it's not like all the problems have just gone away. I mean, we're faced with some massive stuff here. And yeah, like record numbers came out and voted. The people spoke up. This is all well and good, but we're now faced with a ton of work, right? So this is kind of setting the foregrounds for our conversation today. But before we get into addressing this current situation, I would love to hear a bit about what kind of political activist work you are engaged in right now.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I am the co-chair of the Akron DSA, and I also consider myself an eco-socialist. So this is like being involved in caring about the environment and ecosystems, and also being involved in doing it in a just and equitable way, so that all people benefit from it, not just people in rich areas, not just people who live near a national park. Like everyone should be enjoying the benefit of the environment. And also we all should be called to serve the environment, in my opinion.
Yes.
As well. So it's about building relationships that way. And to me, yoga and mindfulness practices go really well with this work. It's not the opinion of everyone in this work, but to me, like, I need to have my practices in order to function at all, both on like a personal level and then definitely in a group level. And then when you take a group of people who are active in their community out into the world with people who don't necessarily agree with them, it's essential to me to be able to maintain calm and to be able to look at the bigger picture of any given situation. So this is all very connected to me personally, although when I work in my capacity as an Akron DSA steering committee member, obviously I'm not going there and telling everyone about yoga.
Yeah.
However,
it's your personal balancing tool.
Yes.
Yeah. So what, in terms of like the nitty-gritty ground efforts that work looks like, what kind of things are you doing for that work? We
do a lot of different things. It's been a big challenge with COVID, like everything else. It's a lot harder to build a community organization when meeting in community is dangerous and scary for some people. And really it always has been for some people. And I think that this is a good chance to look at ableism and other forms of inequality as well, and think about how, like, as a middle-class white woman, it's pretty easy for me to walk down the street and nothing bad will happen to me. Sometimes I like to take this opportunity too of like, oh my gosh, I could get sick if someone did this to me. Like, well, some people are facing, like, if someone touches their wheelchair, it could really mess up something that they need to interact with the world. So maybe...
So ableism, can you go into that term a little bit more?
Ableism is... We're basically saying the default human is someone who has what we would consider like a fully functional body. And that's just not what being a human is. So ableism is similar to any other ism in that you're discriminating against people because of their different abilities or lack of an ability, whether it's physical, intellectual, just, it's something that our society often, I think, overlooks as a problem, because a lot of our value is placed on us as workers and productivity, and that's not really a great way of looking at humans, in my opinion.
Yeah, because it's kind of, it's creating a paradigm where the more able you are to be productive to societal standards, the more value and the more privilege you'll be given by that society.
Exactly.
It sounds like a way of just examining oneself and their own amount of privilege within the system that we have. And like one major realization that I came to over the summer was like being, you know, a single able-bodied white male is like, because I have more privilege given to me by the system, I have a greater degree of responsibility to serve my community.
Well, that's beautiful. I'm glad you realized that. I think that a lot of us are going through realizations like that, but it can also be a pretty lonely journey, because we all do face challenges, even if you are able-bodied, even though you're a white male in peak physical condition. You still are oppressed by a lot of systems as well, and I think we need to acknowledge that inequality coming from unequal distribution of wealth, from lack of care for the earth, is affecting you too. So I like to look at it from a lens of intersectionality, which means there's all of these different ways in which people are privileged and oppressed. And there's no one who's absolutely privileged, and there's no one who's absolutely oppressed to the point where they cannot do anything at all. Yeah. Of course, all of us have different gifts, all of us have abilities, all of us have weaknesses, all of us have things that we need to overcome. And I think that gets lost in these conversations as well, and it's not necessarily the job of everyone to be like, oh, well, Matthew, how are you feeling oppressed today? That's not something we should expect from everyone, but I do think it's important to realize that you can be an able-bodied white man who is houseless, and then you are, in fact, not, in our society, valued very much at all.
Right.
So there are many different ways that these systems are oppressing us, and I think that meditation is the best way to approach that personally.
Like a valuable or a clear assessment of where one's ableism is at, or
a clear assessment of how different things can be happening to you at once.
Okay.
And you need to find an emotional way to deal with them without like vomiting them on the world.
Yes, for sure.
So to me, that's a big part of activism work, is looking at the different ways that I'm both privileged and oppressed, and coming to terms with that within myself before I try and speak about it.
Yeah.
So like today after work, I even spent some time, just like 5 minutes, just thinking quietly about like the best ways that I could communicate to you. And of course, I'm sure I won't do a perfect job, because I'm a person who gets like very nervous and excitable sometimes.
That's okay, me too.
But I know that, and that's part of it.
But I love what you just said, though, is that it's not, like with all things, it's not a black and white thing. It's like no matter who you are, you're at some unique point of all these complex interacting factors of intersectionality, and there's ways in which every individual is privileged and oppressed. So rather than approaching the world with this sense of blame, there's a sense of responsibility, and also realizing that, you know, things could be better for you, things could be worse for you. What's your unique role in the situation? Yeah.
And I think that maybe bringing that to most of our conversations when we're trying to have a difficult conversation is important. Just realizing that the situation is very complicated. It's always going to be very complicated. And everyone's going to be having different emotional reactions to different parts of that intersectionality at all times.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so you answered my second question, basically, which is, you know, how have the mindfulness practices, how has the yogic perspective helped you to inform your approach to your work? And I think that's a great starting place of, you know, taking that self-assessment, seeing where you're at. And if everybody was doing, well, if more people were doing that in this time right now, then, you know, maybe we'd get at some more productive solutions a little bit more quickly. So I guess moving on from that, let's get to the current circumstances and the current situation that we're in. You got a leaf there. Yeah, the hair has caught a leaf.
Here you go, Amelia.
Yeah, we'll hand it to the cat. So with, you know, the outcome of the presidential election and the you know, possible change at hand, how will this be affecting your approach? How will this be affecting your work?
I think that a lot of conversations are going to need to happen around that. Particularly in the Akron Democratic Socialists of America, like one of the things we do is talk every day about the current situation, whatever it is, and how we can move forward under that situation. But the bottom line is, no matter what happens, we have to do something. Mm-hmm. So being able to approach that with this perspective is very helpful to me. I think that it's a very good thing that we'll no longer have Trump in the White House.
Agreed.
Speaking of ableism, one of the most disappointingly ableist individuals I've ever seen publicly speak would be Trump. The way he devalues people is deeply upsetting to me, and I think deeply upsetting to many, many people. I'm glad that that trauma isn't going to be in people's lives as much. I'm glad that when my mother turns on the news, she doesn't see someone yelling about how horrible women are. Like, this is all important to me, and it's a relief. And one of the first things when we finally had this moment of, like, on Saturday, I was out in my garden, and my neighbor, who's actually walking down the street right now, came out and said, like, it's over, they finally called it. And I was like, okay. And I did feel that very much like, all right, we can move on. And I felt a sense of relief, but I didn't feel like all of the problems were fixed.
Right, yeah. And that's a very realistic way of looking at it. And, you know, as I said, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today, because I think for people who are less politically aware and involved as yourself, there can be that sense of relief of like, okay, well, everything's fine now, I voted, I don't need to do anything else. But as we said, it's like, this is another starting point. And I feel like, you know, you'd have some great things to offer about where people can start to get plugged into that process.
Yeah, so I think personally that you need to make sure you're ready to have conversations before you have them. That's very important to me, particularly as someone who's more privileged. Like, I'm a white, able-bodied person, and I realize that sometimes I'm going to hear things that I'm not ready to hear. And I need to know how to react to that and how to respond in an appropriate way. So I would say one of the first things that we absolutely need to do is just cultivate a daily practice of thinking about how things went when we have discussions like this and how we could do better and how we feel about things. And that's the other thing about even the Trump situation. Like, allow yourself to feel that happiness. Allow yourself to feel that, like, yes, okay, this is good.
We can celebrate for a moment.
Yes, definitely. Allow yourself to celebrate. But don't ignore the sad feelings. Don't ignore the scary feelings. Don't ignore the fact that today in Akron, people are being evicted via Zoom. Right. Like, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
This is a bad situation for a lot of people. And to me, like, being able to live in my house and being out in the garden and, like, everything's nice, like, sure, I'm going to feel that. But to someone who's about to lose their home or is losing their job or in some way isn't having their needs met, it doesn't matter to them.
Right.
Whether or not we have Trump. Like, maybe that's a bit of a, like, oh, okay, back of the mind thing. But when your immediate needs aren't being met, I just don't think saying, like, okay, well, X new candidate will fix it. And I have, while I think that Joe Biden is a much better human being to be dealing with than Trump, I do not think he has all the answers.
Right. Nor should we expect immediate help.
Anyone to have all of the answers. And we also have quite a few more months here before he can really put anything into play. And unfortunately, it seems like the current White House administration is not willing to work with him during a transition, which is going to be setting things back for Americans in general. I really hope that we'll get some financial relief. I hope we'll get another stimulus passed so people who are at least the most in need will be able to have some more access to resources quickly. But I think that's the other part of it too, is that like it's not just like one person sits in the White House and fixes everything.
Right.
So we have a whole representative government on a federal level and on the state level and on the local level. And then also many people operating within the community who are addressing problems or creating them.
Right, right.
And that's another way that like a wide lens of like looking back. And in politics we call it power mapping, like you're drawing out like who is affecting what situation. But to me that's also kind of a mindful approach, because you have to take a step back and really look at the situation, like, and you can't do that in a deeply emotional state.
Right,
You have to feel all of the emotions, the anger and the fear, and then you have to look at it and be like, wow, like who's acting on what here? What can I do today? What can I do next week? What can we do next year? What should I be asking my senator to do? What should be our priorities? These are all like very difficult questions that I don't have the answers to. Joe Biden doesn't have the answers to.
Yeah.
Mike DeWine doesn't have the answers to. We have to create these solutions together.
Yeah, and they come about from conscious conversation. And yeah, I mean, what really struck me about what you just said is these decisions can't be made from a riled up emotional place. Just like when, in our own lives, when we get really worked up about something and make a rash decision, there's usually some pretty big fallout from that. Politically, there absolutely is, because those rash decisions affect a lot of people, and that's what we've been seeing for the last 4 years.
Definitely.
So the having the self-awareness and the mindfulness practice to feel all those emotions, but then be able to step back from them and start to find a clear path towards action is so key. So for people who are, I mean, let's just start with the local level, because it seems like that's where you're most plugged in. And for people who want to get more involved, I think getting involved on the local level is, at least what I've experienced, has been the most meaningful to do so. So what suggestions might you give to people who are looking to get plugged in to maybe some of the conversations going on, some of the action that are happening to help people who, are more on the oppressed side?
Well, we live in an amazing time in some ways, because I think that the internet is giving us a lot of access to what we can do.
Yeah.
So with Akron DSA, like we meet online and then we occasionally do direct actions. This summer we did a few anti-racist actions. But so anyone's welcome to come to our meetings, obviously. But I would also recommend looking at other community organizations. Freedom Block is a Black-led organizing group in Akron. They did a huge Get Out the Vote action in Akron, and they ended up, the Akron turnout was like 73%.
Awesome.
Which is amazing.
Yeah.
Like, that's really good.
Yeah.
That's much. Cleveland was like 50.
Wow.
So if we're looking at like Northeast Ohio, I mean, obviously Cleveland is much bigger, but like that's very exciting to me.
Yes.
I also think that one way to go about it, if you're just starting and maybe you don't want to have these like, it's okay to not be ready.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too. And
we
it's
don't
also
have to be fully informed on everything in order to take some kind of step forward.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I think is a good, a more comfortable step for some people is to think about the issue that they feel the most connected to already and start working with that. Because ultimately, if you're working on the ground in your community, you are making a difference. And so if that's food, the food bank, now the National Guard is pulling out, is looking for volunteers. There's also, if you don't want to physically go somewhere, because that's a perfectly valid thing too.
Yeah,
I want to stress that. You may not be safe, and that's something that you have to decide yourself, and I can't tell people you need to go out and do this. You can definitely make donations. There's also a lot of local organizations will be looking for people to do tasks like data entry. So that's something you could do from home that doesn't necessarily require any risk, and you could be making a difference. All organizations are different, once again, so I don't want to say what everybody wants. We also have locally in Akron, we have the Wake Food Pantry, which is a queer-run, totally self-sustaining unit. They're a nonprofit, but they don't have a board. It's some people in the community who are going out and getting food to other people who need it, and that's awesome. So definitely look them up. Food is a big issue to me because in my day job I'm a lunch lady. So I tend to feel myself like really plugged into to feeding the community. That's something that's important to me, and I always have my eye on like what's happening with different groups there. There's also many churches who run food banks and food pantries. And so it depends on what you're comfortable with, once again, but if your main issue would be getting food to people, like there's always someone looking for help with that.
Yeah.
I also think that one thing you can do that's very simple on social media, if you follow local organizations, it helps them and it helps you get informed on a level that you can take. So I'm not a huge fan of like doom scrolling through social media. We were talking earlier, I really have to limit the amount of time I spend. Doom
scrolling. Now, is that a term of yours personally, or did you pick that up somewhere?
I picked that up on the internet, but
I love that. I'm going to start using that and relaying that to, all my yogis and whatever, because it so accurately represents what is going on and how much our realities can get distorted by just mindlessly flipping through there. But someone's back. I do love this idea though of like, the local organizations, they may have a difficult time getting their voices out there, and a positive use of social media, in my opinion, would be like following these organizations and intentionally going to their page, like looking at what they're posting, because that's going to be our conduit into knowing what we can do, how we can help them.
And I think it's also helpful because you're not stressing out the person running the organization then, like getting a lot of emails like, hey, I'm new here, what can I do? Like that's exhausting. As someone who's been on the receiving end of that sort of email, like there are times where I just want to be like,
we already listed it.
But like, please just look at a website. And while obviously everyone appreciates community outreach, it can also, I think particularly for minority-run groups this year has been extremely stressful to hear someone who just for the first time realized there's racists in Akron. Like responding to that when you've been living racism your whole life can be exhausting. And I think that goes for any sort of oppression as well. So that's a great tool to me, but I'm not recommending spending all of your time on social media. I'm recommending taking a mindful amount of time, say today, like, well, I'm really thinking about, I want to know what the Akron NAACP is going to do next. I'm going to look this up and I'm going to see. Or I'm going to sign up to their email list so I know when they have their next event. And that's a very good one. Obviously, we all get like 1 billion emails, and filtering through them can be a pain, but that is a way that a lot of community organizations get the word out on things that just, it's very low effort for you to click and open an email, and they can send this all at once, and it's a lot easier than it ever has been in the past, so I think it's exciting.
And I like what you said about picking an issue that matters to you, and going with that, because we are in this age where information is, we're drowning in it. We're drowning in emails. It's so overwhelming. So like one of the things an individual can do is pick that issue that they care about, find the organization that's addressing it, and stay up with what they're putting out there, that what the organization is putting out there, so then the individual knows how they can contribute, rather than asking a million questions.
Or even asking if you do run into someone like at an event and they're doing something, chances are they're there to answer questions. Making sure they have time then to answer questions. Or a lot of people will be very willing to contact you on their own terms, but maybe if you're trying to sign up voters, which is not something probably anyone is going to be doing in the coming weeks, although I would argue we should be doing that all the time, and it's only one very small part of what we should be doing. We should also be talking about more democratic workplaces, more democratic community organizations. Like, all of these conversations need to happen to me, but I think finding the time and the place that's best to have conversations is great. And I would also say, if you don't know what issues are the most important to you, try reading The Devil Strip. Because locally, they are covering a lot right now that no one else will touch. And they recently had an article about a family facing eviction. I've never seen anything like that in a newspaper before. Really good reporting. They've had some really good public health reporting. They've had very good reporting on just what it's like to be an Akronite during these times. And I think that's a great way to plug in with also not stressing yourself or anyone out too much, like picking up a paper is okay, or choosing to go to their social media page at a time and reading something is good. I wouldn't suggest you just Google eviction and then doom through that for like 5 hours either. But I do think that learning about things in manageable ways is what's going to keep you learning about them and keep you engaged. It's just like if you decided that you wanted to start doing deadlifts. You wouldn't go out to the gym and just decide to do deadlifts for 5 hours straight.
5 days a week.
Not a good plan.
You're probably going to hurt yourself. You will hurt yourself.
And I think you'll hurt yourself, like, psychologically and emotionally. And we're all in a different place in what we can take, but I wouldn't want to...
So if you start dooming through every issue, then it's going to leave you less able to contribute positively.
Definitely, and it will probably encourage you to shut yourself down in the same way that a serious injury from improper lifting technique would make you unable to lift. I think that engaging in any political or social issue in a way that isn't sustainable is ultimately going to do more harm than good, because you will exhaust yourself, and then you'll be like, well, screw it. I just want to live my life, and whatever happens, happens, and as long as it's not happening to me, we're fine. And that's how we got to where we are.
That apathy, dangerous apathy.
And I think that, if nothing else, the Trump situation has given us this, like, wow, there's definitely a problem. Like, most people will acknowledge that in America right now, people are not communicating well, we're not getting along, we're not finding solutions. Various needs aren't being met for various people. I don't know anyone who's like, wow, everything in my life is fine.
There are very few of us saying that right now. I think that my life is going pretty well, and I would not say that every day I wake up and I'm like, wow, stuff is great. So we look at that, and then how many more issues some people are facing right now, like losing their job and their home and their health care. There's a lot going on. So just to summarize everything a little bit here, because what we're really looking at is creating this manageable approach to being active. So finding organizations that are connected to issues you care about, signing up for their newsletters, following them on social media, checking on the actionable items that they present through their information, digesting that in an amount that's manageable for you, and then preceding all of that, just kind of regularly checking in with oneself to assess, what your level of privilege is, what's your level of oppression, how does that compare to others in your community, getting that critical and honest view of where you sit in all of those things. And I love all of that, because it feels like that feels manageable to me. That feels like, okay, here's a clear path forward. And it also has me feeling like just thinking like that, I kind of automatically feel more connected to my community, even if I'm not, going to a bunch of protests or public sort of meeting type things. So I love everything you threw out here today. Thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Any closing remarks? Anything that's coming to mind about just the greater situation, or things that you'd want to say about this work?
I guess the most important thing to me is just knowing that the fight is not going to be over in your lifetime, and you can't do it all on your own. I think that one of the things in the yoga and meditation and wellness communities, we talk a lot about self-care. I'd like to move a little bit beyond that to community care, because to me, my community that I've intentionally created, the people in my life and the people I interact with every day. Obviously, you don't get to choose your workplace necessarily, or if you show up at a city council meeting, you never know what's going to happen. And there's always good stories there. But I think that creating a group of people that you can have these honest discussions with, and building real relationships with people who are different than you and having different experiences and being open to their experiences is the most important work you can do. And that's work all of us can do every day in our lives. Like, this is a wonderful conversation that we're having, and I really appreciate you reaching out and having a chance to do this. But I think that, to me, that's the most important work, is continuing to find ways to have meaningful conversations with each other about how we can co-create a better world together.
Yes.
And we're all empowered to do so. Like, that's my dream and my vision, is that we're all empowered in a true democracy. In many different ways we're participating. All of our work can be meaningful, and all of us have a voice.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. I'll be linking to several of the organizations that we highlighted today. The Food Bank, Freedom Block. I'll have links there so you can follow them on social media, subscribe to their newsletters. And thanks for tuning in. And Heather, thank you for being here. Appreciate you.